Sweet. Thanks, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and to be able to talk about my favorite topic, which is defining open source AI. I'm the executive director of the Open Source Initiative. I started at the organization about 3 years ago. And one of the first things that I noticed was exactly how these AI systems that were introduced were changing a lot of the pillars of how I've been thinking about open source software. So I wanted to know more, and I thought that the Open Source Initiative needed to lead the way on this investigation and understanding what is this thing that we call AI. So one of the first episodes that popped up into my brain was this, the story of, on the New York Times, the story of this dad who his life was completely upended because he snapped a picture of his naked child and sent it to his doctor to say, hey, you know, is this thing normal? And an automatic machine basically got it wrong, misinterpreted that picture, automatically tagged this father as a pedophile. Google, because he used Google, but it could have been anything else, blocked access to all of his services, his online services, triggered an automatic alarm going to the police. And so this life was completely upended. So this led me to think, clearly, there is a bug in this system. And it's a very complex bug. Definitely, it involves internal processes at the company that triggered this automatic alarm. But inside the AI, a very fast robot deployed at scale is making a judgment call that got wrong and wrongly affects the life of citizens that abide to the law. So what do we need to do, the big question as a society? What do we need to ask to fix these issues? And with my mind, with my brain programmed in the very early days for free software and around those principles, like the answer would have been, I need to get access to the source code. So we had these slogans in the 90s when we were saying that with enough eyeballs, all bags are shallow. And in general, we could assume that having unrestricted access to source code was the solution to pretty much any problem that society would have had. So ask for the source code of the AI to Google. Is that the simple solution? And well, with everything with AI, I quickly learned that nothing is simple. There are too many pieces in this black box that AI systems are that don't fall squarely into our assumptions of open source and the open source definition. There is no clear understanding, for example, there's no clear boundary between what is data, what is software, what is transformation of data, what is transformation of software. These black boxes are still quite opaque also to the researchers and the deployers and developers who put them into actions. And we don't know exactly what the concept is of this source code. So with all these questions buzzing in our head, the OSI decided to take a step back, try to understand exactly what was going on in this complex automatic decision-making system. And we set this objective to reach a consensus or to drive a global conversation so that we could get to the shared understanding of what open source AI means. And there is a very much different than how the open source definition came to exist. The open source definition pretty much came out of decades of experience, decades of practice, lots of existing examples of what open source meant, even though the name was not exactly that one. And it came out of the proposal, let's say, and very widely adopted immediately of one single individual coming out of a lab saying, hey, let's call it free software first, and then let's call this list of 10 principles open source. Yeah, let's use it. Now, it was easy. For AI, we needed to do something different. I cannot sit in my room and think of the open source AI definition and say, hey, here it is. I think that there have been some examples of this approach, and they haven't really picked up. So we have collected a large coalition of people who and organizations and groups with different interests from all over the world to have a process. So we've been talking to organizations in the open world, like Mozilla, Creative Commons, etc., but also researchers, legal communities, VCs and industry players, but also civil rights activists and representatives. And we've started to learn a few things. We have learned a few things. So I'll give you a very quick rundown of what we learned in the last couple of years of work. The first thing is that we have been told, so there's been consensus, that we cannot define anything but open source AI. The term is already in use. People are talking about it. There is even a piece of legislation in Europe that mentions open source AI. So we cannot really focus on machine learning specifically as I wished, or create a new term like open cybernetics. At one point was buzzing into my head. So no, it must be an open source AI. But also, the other issue that we discovered is that if we wanted to go back and read, while rereading the GNU Manifesto, I realized that there is no definition of what the GNU Manifesto talks about. So what is the concept of software, the concept of program, the other word that appears often in the GNU Manifesto, is not defined. We had to define what AI means because there is no shared understanding about that either. So we decided to pick the definition used by the OECD, even though at the beginning, within a few months, it changed even. But the definition of open source AI refers specifically to AI system because the system is what really gets executed. It's not just the model weights, the parameters, or other components. One other thing that we have learned is the building blocks of AI are multiple, and there are three main buckets. And the one is hardware, which we decided to ignore because it's only a function of money, basically. You get money and you buy GPUs. Maybe there is a little bit of a function of time in there, like how much time you have to wait before your data centers are in place. But it's definitely a simple problem compared to the second problem, which is knowledge. Again, a function of time and money, but eventually you can acquire it. And as many more companies are getting into the space, it's becoming clear. But the last piece is a lot more complicated to achieve. Not only to these modern machine learning and AI systems that have been challenging the most, the open source AI definition, the open source definition, and definitely are part of the open source AI definition research, is the data issue. The data is not only a function of money and time, but also has a very, very complicated set of legal legislations and legal frameworks that are different all over the world. Like every country in the world has a different way of dealing with data and information. So the biggest challenge to create new AI is to solve the issue around data, is to understand that data issue. Second thing that we've learned is we needed to retrace the history of open source and how it came to exist. From understand the legal frameworks and establishing principles and then writing legal documents, agreements and terms. That's the history of how open source came to be. First, the communities writing the software, understanding that copyright was being used as a obstacle to the science. Then they established the principles and wrote them down in the GNU Manifesto, and finally wrote the legal documents that would cement and crystallize the intentions of those communities. So we're compressing all these 30 years of evolution of the free software principles into a few months, if you want. And by retracing the history, it was simple to take the pieces of the GNU Manifesto, for example, and transform them and use them for AI to base our principles. Like we want that if we want to know, we want to make sure that we can share AI systems that we like with other people. And what do we need to do in order to achieve that? It's the next question. So we established that we need to share, we need to be able to, we were easily rewriting also the free software definition. People who are familiar with it will recognize it here. Slight changes in the wording so that they comply with the AI nomenclature. Now, you will also notice that there is a keyword missing. If you're familiar with open source, with the free software definition, next to the right to use and the right to modify, that definition says you need to have access to the source code in order to use the software. You need to study the software, and you need to have access to the source code to study, to modify the software. It's a precondition. The precondition for AI is having access to the preferred form to make modification to the AI system. What does that look like? And this is the third thing that we have learned. And this took us the longest amount of time. And I think we're there, but some people disagree. In any case, so in order to discover what the preferred form to make modification to an AI system is, we needed to take a little bit of a step back. And we designed a code design process by which we asked many people in the community to analyze 4 specific systems. We analyzed Bloom, Llama 2, OpenCV, and I'm blanking out, and Eleuther AI's Pythia. So these are 4 systems that have been developed by different interest groups. One is a commercial from Llama, one is a research from institution from like Bloom, one is a hacker group, Eleuther AI, etc. And OpenCV is a computer vision neural networks approach. So it's not a generative AI, it's a different kind of AI. So we asked these people, these volunteers, to analyze these groups and tell us, based on a list of components, general components of machine learning systems, ask them, vote which components you need. And that gave us a checklist with, at the end of the process, gave us a checklist, and these are the components that are necessary. Finally, we released, based on the results of this co-design process, we released the latest draft, which is 008 of the open source AI definition, which has a preamble at the beginning saying what is the scope of what is an AI system? What are we talking about in this document, which is the AI system? Why do we need an open source AI? And why do we need open source at all into this space? Then what is open source AI with those 4 freedoms listed, a very short definition. A definition of the preferred form to make modification, this time focusing on machine learning only. And the reason is because other AI, like algorithmic AI, any AI that you write, that humans write and can explain, falls squarely into the open source definition, the classic one. It's machine learning that challenges everything. And then we have the component checklist. Now, preferred form to make modifications. This is the biggest reveal, and it's made of 3 buckets. There is, for sure, on you need to have access to the model parameters, which is the results of the training. Model parameters is the word that includes weights and biases. You need to have the source code of the software used to train and to run the system. So you need to know how to run inference on those weights. And third, the largest bucket is the data issue. The data issue has been synthesized here as in a very legalese terms. It's sufficiently detailed information about the data used to train the system so that a skilled person can recreate a substantially equivalent system using the same data or similar ones. And I can see already faces like, wait, what? You're not requiring the data? So we're not I don't think it's necessary to require the data. It actually requiring the original data set would really, really, really limit the availability of open source AI. It would make it impossible to have an open source AI. And in fact, as of today, there is no open source AI. If we require strictly the original training data set, there is zero systems. And that's because the laws in general around the world make it really hard to share data. When you assemble large data sets, and anyone who has assembled large data sets knows that lots of stuff gets into those data sets, and there will always be someone who claims that you cannot use their data inside your data. And that's just by itself. So we took the next step, and we wrote the data information concept as a way to get around this. We're really asking the same functionally the same thing as having access to the data set. It's about being able to recreate from scratch that system that we have received. And we asked volunteers again to take this concept of data information and go out and test 10 systems. Actually, we ended up with 11, and the 11th is not in this list, but anyway. And these 10, so checking with the list of components required in draft 008 of only the ones who you would expect to be open source AI actually fall into the category of open source AI, and that would be Pythia and Olmo. Olmo is the research result of Allen Institute, and Pythia has been developed by, it's another research group, basically, by Eleuther AI, another nonprofit based in the United States. And then there is Arctic at the very top. Expected, yes, but we really based this on the promise of the company Snowflake, who says that they will release their, eventually, they're about to release, not eventually. I mean, they told us in a couple of weeks they will release their training code. But the bar is extremely high with that data information concept. Now, where do we stand in the process? We are on target, I think, to release, to have a release candidate by the end of the month, beginning of July, mid-July at the latest. And after that, we're going to be using the rest of the summer until the end of October to popularize that definition and that release candidate, gathering more feedback from meetings around the world that we have already scheduled. And with that, if you want to get involved, we have the drafts are published. They've been published all the time. And 008 is the latest one. It's open to public comment on the website, opensource.org/deep-dive. You'll find the history of the project, how we've been running it. And finally, a call to all of you to become individual members of OSI. We need more European support. We need more people from Europe to be aware, to follow our actions, to follow our activities. And we also need more sponsors from Europe because, as Simon will discuss, we have a lot of activity in Europe that helps the European companies, European actors, and European society to be to continue to have an open source ecosystem. And with that, thank you, and I will be around.